Welcome to MindAtlas. When most people think about traumatic memory loss, they imagine a simple equation. Stay with me, because what we're about to explore goes far deeper than anything you've heard in a therapy session or a psychology class. Something bad happens, the mind can't handle it, so it erases it. Clean. Simple. Almost merciful. But that version of the story is a comfortable lie we tell ourselves because the truth is significantly more disturbing. Your brain doesn't forget trauma because it's weak. It forgets, or more accurately, it transforms, trauma because it's running a cold, ruthless survival algorithm that cares nothing about your sense of identity, your understanding of reality, or your ability to trust your own mind. It cares about one thing only: keeping you alive long enough to survive the next threat. Let's start at the biological root of this. Inside your brain, there is a small, almond-shaped structure called the amygdala. Think of it as your brain's alarm system. When something traumatic happens, the amygdala fires off a distress signal so powerful that it essentially hijacks the entire brain. In that moment, the normal memory formation process gets interrupted. Your hippocampus, the region responsible for organizing experiences into coherent, narrative memories, gets flooded with stress hormones. Cortisol, adrenaline, norepinephrine. These chemicals don't enhance memory the way people assume. In high enough doses, they shatter it. What gets stored instead is something fragmented. Sensory. Emotional. A smell. A texture. A particular quality of light. A feeling in your chest that you can't name. These are not memories in the way we typically understand them. They are more like scattered shards of an experience that never got assembled into a coherent story. And here's where it gets genuinely dark. Those shards don't disappear. They live in the body. They live in the nervous system. Researchers like Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, who spent decades studying trauma survivors, found something that shocked even experienced clinicians. Traumatic memories aren't stored the way ordinary memories are. They bypass the brain's narrative centers and embed themselves in the body as physical sensations, reflexes, and emotional reactions that seem to have no origin. This is why a trauma survivor might panic in a grocery store for no apparent reason. Why a combat veteran flinches at a car backfiring 3 decades later. Why someone who was abused as a child might suddenly feel overwhelming dread when they smell a particular cologne. Their brain never filed those experiences as past. It filed them as ongoing threats. The memory isn't gone. It's been reclassified. But dissociative amnesia, the complete inability to consciously recall a traumatic event, is something else entirely. And this is where the story gets even more complicated. For years, there was a heated scientific debate about whether this phenomenon was even real. Some researchers argued it was impossible for the brain to selectively block out specific memories while leaving everything else intact. Then came the neuroimaging studies. And those studies revealed something that should fundamentally change how you think about your own mind. When participants who had documented trauma were shown cues related to their suppressed memories, the prefrontal cortex, the executive, decision-making part of the brain, became intensely active. It was working. It was doing something deliberate. It was reaching down into memory retrieval and shutting it off. Not passively. Actively. Like a hand reaching into a filing cabinet and slamming the drawer closed before your conscious mind could open it. Your brain is censoring itself. In real time. Without your permission. This mechanism is called active suppression, and it operates below the threshold of conscious awareness. You don't decide to forget. Your brain decides for you. And it does so because at some point, remembering that particular thing was more dangerous to your survival than not remembering it. A child who remembers that their caregiver is a source of harm might reject that caregiver entirely. In an environment where that caregiver is also the only source of food, shelter, and protection, that rejection could be fatal. So the brain makes a ruthless calculation. Suppress the memory. Preserve the attachment. Stay alive. That's not weakness. That's the most sophisticated survival architecture that 400 million years of evolution has ever produced. But it comes with a cost that the evolution didn't account for, because the cost reveals itself decades later, in therapy offices and broken relationships and anxiety disorders that seem to have no traceable cause. Now here is the part that most people never talk about. The suppressed memory doesn't stay cleanly suppressed. That's the myth. The reality is that the brain, in the process of burying the original traumatic memory, often fills the gap with something else. Sometimes it fills it with nothing, just a blank, an absence, a strange hollow feeling when you try to think about a certain period of your life. But sometimes, and this is the deeply unsettling part, it fills it with a fabricated memory. One that makes narrative sense. One that explains the emotional residue without exposing the original wound. Elizabeth Loftus, one of the most cited psychologists in the world, spent her career demonstrating just how astonishingly easy it is to implant false memories into the human mind. In one of her most famous experiments, she managed to convince a significant percentage of participants that they had been lost in a shopping mall as children, an event that had never happened. They didn't just agree it might have happened. They remembered it. They added details. They described their emotional state. The memory felt completely real because to the brain, a convincing false memory and a real memory are neurologically indistinguishable. Now apply that finding to trauma. To the dark spaces in your own history. To the things you remember clearly, and perhaps more importantly, to the things you don't. The implications are staggering. There is a reason this matters beyond the purely academic. Right now, millions of people are walking around with emotional wounds they can't locate and can't explain. They feel inexplicable shame, or rage, or fear. They sabotage relationships without understanding why. They carry a weight they cannot name. And because the memory that would explain all of it has been reclassified, suppressed, or overwritten, they spend years, sometimes entire lifetimes, treating the symptoms without ever finding the source. The newest research in trauma neuroscience is pointing towards something that would have seemed like science fiction 20 years ago. Memory reconsolidation. Every time you retrieve a memory, every single time you consciously recall something, that memory becomes briefly unstable. It reopens. It's malleable for a short window of time. And then it reconsolidates. It gets stored again. But it doesn't always get stored in the same form. It can be modified by your emotional state in the moment. By new information. By the context you're retrieving it in. This means that every time you revisit a traumatic memory, if you do so in the wrong conditions, you might actually be strengthening it. Re-traumatizing yourself. Burning it deeper. But in the right conditions, with a skilled therapist, with techniques like EMDR or specific somatic therapies, you can essentially intercept that reconsolidation window and change the emotional charge attached to the memory. Not erase it. Change it. Update it. Tell your amygdala that the threat is no longer present. This is the edge of what neuroscience currently understands. And it suggests something profound. That the brain, for all its terrifying capacity to hide things from you, also contains within it the very mechanism for its own healing. Your mind is not broken. It made the only choices it knew how to make in the darkness. The question isn't whether your brain betrayed you by hiding what happened. The question is whether you're willing to look at how it protected you, and then slowly, carefully, help it understand that you don't need that protection anymore. This is the work. Not dramatic. Not fast. But underneath all of that science, underneath all of those mechanisms and chemicals and neural pathways, there is a version of you that survived something it was never supposed to survive. And that deserves to be understood. If this kind of deep psychological exploration is what you're looking for, the real science behind how the human mind works, the dark corners that most people never investigate, then subscribe to MindAtlas. Hit the bell. Because we go places here that other channels are afraid to go. And we're just getting started.